Dumelang, welcome to Face the Nation. My name is Clement Manyatela. Great to have you with us here on SABC News. On the show tonight, what exactly is the position of the Department of Communications on the SABC Bill? I asked this because the Minister of Communications, Solly Malatsi, who is from the DA, has withdrawn the bill. But just a few weeks ago, his deputy, Mondli Gungubele, who was minister before the GNU, was urging Parliament to make sure the SABC Bill is finalized urgently. Mondli Gungubele will speak to us tonight. Also on the show, should the DA consider walking away from the GNU if the ANC continues to insist on its existing policy being implemented, some of which the DA is against? Tony Leon was one of the negotiators for the DA in the GNU, and he'll join us tonight. And then later, will the Republican government under President Donald Trump be kind to South Africa? Or are the SA-US relations that have been going through some mending over the last year about to be marred again? The man who will be at the forefront of speaking for South Africa in the US, Ebrahim Rasool, will join us tonight after being confirmed as the South African ambassador to the US. But first, my comment. So there is something interesting that I have observed about politicians of late. There's always something interesting about politicians, especially those crossing the floor, so to speak. There was a fascinating conversation between Floyd Shivambu and Mzwandile Mpeche, who is our colleague here on the SABC. This happened after Shivambu was appointed as the Secretary General of the MK Party. Now, during that conversation about his new roles and responsibilities, Mzwandile asked him about his relationship with the former President Jacob Zuma now, where that relationship is versus back when Shivambu, together with the EFF, led an attack, so to speak, against the then President Jacob Zuma. He now says Zuma is an honorable man. So let's be clear. Obviously, it's a legitimate question to ask. If this is the man who used to think and would express that Zuma was corrupt, lacked integrity, and was dishonorable when he was in another party, how did he move from that to him being the most diligent, honorable, and honest leader? And that's not to say that politicians are not allowed to change their minds about their views on people. In fact, we all know there are no permanent friends or permanent enemies in politics. It's all about their interests, which is fine. But at least they must own it. When you have someone who has described Zuma like this.
We as the EFF believe that the recall of Jacob Zuma is long overdue. It should have happened as soon as 4 years ago when he began with his wayward ways, when we began to expose that he's a corrupt individual who has got wrong association with the criminal syndicate of the Guptas, when we took him on the pay back the money issue and he ultimately paid, when we exposed that he's a constitutional delinquent who failed to uphold, respect and defend the Constitution as is expected in the section that establishes the presidency. So we had been saying throughout as the EFF consistently, we even refused him in many instances to address the State of Nation address because we have been saying to the whole of South Africa that Jacob Zuma cannot continue as a president of the Republic.
If someone has held those views, you must ask them about what happened. And Floyd was asked what happened. And now he has justified his change of mind towards the former president.
We were misled on President Zuma, like long before there was even discussion of the formation of Umkhonto weSizwe. That is why, but as part of these engagements...
That's why I really want to know.
Yes.
We were misled.
Yes.
Who misled you?
So the entire discourse of South Africa's politics, right, inclusive of influential media platforms and state institutions which in some instances were abused to pursue political agendas.
And he's not the only one, right? Dalimpofu, who was here last week, once said many things about the former President Jacob Zuma, including this.
The NEC, being the highest decision-making body, now has to sit on an emergency basis on the Wednesday. So what that means is probably that they realize the seriousness and the futility, really, of having Zuma addressing the State of the Nation, delivering the State of the Nation address. It's actually absurd. There's no South African who is sane upstairs who wants to listen to Zuma delivering a State of the Nation address when it's clear that he's going. The question is, when is he going to go?
And I asked him what changed. When did Zuma become this honorable man all of a sudden in his eyes? And this is how he explained it. Your relationship with the former president has changed over time. I was watching an old clip earlier where you said, and I quote, Zuma has humiliated over 50 million South Africans for years now, over Nkandla, over state capture, all sorts of criminal activities. We won't nurse his feelings when he continues humiliating us, end quote. You clearly don't see him the same way now. So what has changed? Because you moved from despising him.
And it's the same Zuma, yeah.
And that's the same man, and now he's being so revered by many of you, including Floyd, who has also uttered almost similar comments before about him.
Yes, you know, politics is something that maybe, I don't know how one can communicate this. There's a certain style in politics, you know, of robustness, which is understood. So I can call you all sorts of things, and then we go out here and go and have a beer if you drink beer or whatever.
So politics is not about truth and honesty.
No, it's not dishonesty. You are a representative of a particular view, all right? And the nature of the beast is that I can't beat you up, so I must be as robust as possible to disagree with you.
So yeah, this is an explanation that politicians often go with. Do you buy it? I mean, I would rather politicians be honest and say, well, it suited my interests to go on attack at the time. And now those interests have changed. Because it's all about political expediency, isn't it? But at least you own it. But now we're told, yeah, we were misled, as if we're talking about children here who couldn't make up their minds, children who had to go with whatever they were told. I know people who have stuck with Thabo Mbeki, people who have stuck with Jacob Zuma, in spite of the attacks against them, whether wrongly or rightly, because they didn't just take whatever they were told and run with it and easily misled because of political interests. The question I have for you tonight is, does it make sense to you when politicians change their minds like this about people and argue that they were misled in the past? Does it make sense what politicians argue, that they were misled to attack politicians they now revere today? You can send us a WhatsApp voice note right now on 078-459-1897. Remember to tell us your name and surname and where you're sending that voice note from. Please keep it at 30 seconds. Alternatively, send us an X on @FaceTheNation SABC. Now, Communications Minister Solly Malatsi has withdrawn the SABC Bill, explaining that after extensive consultations and public input, the current version does not benefit either the SABC or the South African public. The bill was initially introduced by then Minister Mondli Gungubele in 2023 as a replacement for the outdated Broadcasting Act of 1999. Now, this decision seems to have left Gungubele dissatisfied, as he had preferred to make amendments to the existing bill rather than withdraw it entirely. The Deputy Minister joins us on Face the Nation tonight. Deputy Minister, thank you so much for making time for us. Good evening.
Good evening, Clement. Good meeting with your viewership, and thanks for the opportunity.
Just a few weeks ago, you were urging Parliament to make sure the SABC bill is finalized urgently, and then now you've got your minister deciding to withdraw it. You seem to be speaking in different voices. What is the actual approach or decision of the department regarding this SABC bill?
As far as I'm concerned, Clement, there is no moment where the department has sat and took a decision to withdraw the bill. The minister raised his views with me, not necessarily as a decision, and I expressed my views in this regard. I really got shocked when I saw in Sunday Times that he has taken a decision to retract the bill. Why am I worried? I agree with the minister that the financial model has to be sustainable. And I agree that a lot in the bill has to be done in that regard. But removing the bill is highly counterproductive. Let me say why. As we sit here, Clement, SABC is 83% commercially self-supporting with all the difficulties. As I speak here, consumers have shifted very significantly. They select content, Clement, from anywhere, anytime, across any device. We are moving from analog to digital. All that calls for SABC to invest in digital infrastructure on OTT and DTN and direct to home. And the lifespan of their equipment has reached almost its sell-by date. Now, SABC, in other words, is on tenterhooks, if that's the right English word. SABC cannot wait indefinitely to have access to money that actually profit better than it is now.
Yeah.
So when you remove the bill because you say you want to deal with the financial model, when you complete that financial model, when you come back, you have to have a founding legislation for that purpose. It means start another long process so that you have got a legal basis for the financial model. I find it very illogical because the bill is already in the parliamentary process.
Yeah.
Once it's in the parliamentary process, MPs are seized with it. All what you need to do is to amend all the defects that undermine the ideal intention of the financial model. Yes.
But can those amendments be done now with the bill having been withdrawn? Because this is, I would imagine, an opportunity for the department to rework the bill and maybe reintroduce a new version to Parliament in the current financial year.
If you take out the bill, Clement, it's out of the parliamentary system. When you go back to Parliament, you start the process afresh. You know what that process is? It's at the beginning where you do those long consultations. You know, the white paper beginning and all those kind of things. You consult with the people anew, right? And the process that it takes is very long. But when the bill is in Parliament, all you need, you factor in the amendments that improves the funding model. And the process of the bill procedure doesn't stop. And you stand a chance in that regard to actually complete the bill this year and deal with all the other nitty-gritties. But if you do take it out, you amend it in your home. When you go back, it's not like a box that you took it from your home and you're taking it back to your own cupboard or wardrobe. You are taking it back to Parliament. It must follow like any other bill, those long processes.
Yeah.
That's what I mean. So I'm saying SABC, looking at the financial stress they are going through, owing Centec the amount of money they own, they have got no money now to invest in upskilling so that they can adapt with the modern with the modern demands with regard to digital skills and so on.
Which is another issue that the minister has raised around how things have changed. Because this bill, I mean, it's been in the pipeline for how long now? Nearly 16 years, if I'm not mistaken. And the minister's point is that the media landscape has changed drastically since then, over the years. And the SABC bill needs to respond to those changes and the technological advancements. So it appears like we're not talking just about one or two amendments here. There are so many amendments that it's almost like we are really starting almost from scratch here with this bill.
I don't think so, Clement. Already, if you look at the bill, from its inception, its main object was the funding. So a lot of other elements in that funding can be found wanting. There are few elements. Like, let me give you an example, for instance. The bill says, one of the things I think the minister must have misread when I even read his statement. He says the bill is delaying the funding model for 3 years, if you can read his statement.
Yeah.
But that's not true. If you go, it says, once the bill is finished, within 3 years, find a funding model. You can do it in a year, you can do it in 6 months. That's the point I'm trying to make. So in other words, all that I'm saying is that, yes, we agree on the challenges of the modern changes, but the method the minister is choosing, I want to argue, is counterproductive. It is taking the process back. This bill, Clement, I repeat, it was mainly about funding model. So you cannot speak about changing 100 things when you are turning it around.
Are there any new ideas, Deputy Minister, around funding models for the SABC? Because the SABC has a public service mandate. They're here to inform, to educate, to entertain as required of public broadcasters. And that costs a lot of money, about 2 billion rand a year, if I'm not mistaken. Are there any new ideas on where that money can come from? And what about that concern as well that was raised by the minister about the bill opening the door to government interference? Because the minister seems to believe this bill gives too much power to even the communications minister over the appointment of board members. Doesn't that pose a danger to the independence of the broadcaster?
I think let's also correct that. There could be an unintentional misleading there. Let me tell you, the board of SABC is appointed by Parliament, as you know. All what happens, the commercial board, which is a lower board at that level, is appointed by the existing board, which is appointed by Parliament in consultation with the minister. This issue is not even coming from the minister as an individual. Myself and him discussed it and said, is it necessary to appoint the lower board in consultation with the minister? What if the minister disagrees with the board? And would then the board end up accepting whatever the minister said? As me and myself and himself went to Parliament, you can check your records.
Yeah.
We raised this thing in Parliament, and generally the committee was open to deal with that. It's not a big issue. The point is the ACT board, the main board, is appointed by Parliament, not by the minister.
And the new ideas on how the SABC, on a good funding model for the broadcaster, do we have those already?
There's a number of ideas. For instance, others would have requested that can SARS assist in collecting that money? Or can there be a levy that all of us as society, even if it's 2 rand or 5 rand, but which is guaranteed, that can make SABC to plan in a short and medium and a long term. For instance, as I'm talking to you, SABC 26-27 financial year has got no budget for CAPEX. SABC has paused its CAPEX projects and so on.
Yeah.
But if you've got a revenue that can be guaranteed, let's say a levy, it's one of those things that have been proposed.
Okay.
A levy where automatically people will pay maybe say 510 rand a month. SABC has got a minimum revenue on the basis of which they can plan.
Mm-hmm. Just lastly, Deputy Minister, how do you then plan on reconciling your differences about this bill with the minister? Because at some point, you're going to have to put the differences aside and take one approach.
Well, myself and the minister are talking. Also in Parliament, because I've also raised this thing in Parliament. One of the options that are there, I'm not sure which is going to be used. Maybe myself and the minister can resolve. There may be no need to do that. It may go to the clearing house because it becomes a huge difference because of its consequences. So I am positive, Clement, that I think all of us, our intentions are noble. If all of us, our intentions are noble, a noble way must be found to resolve this matter. Myself and the minister will talk. We discuss this matter. He knows my views and so on the matter.
All right. Deputy Communications Minister Mondli Gungubele, I appreciate your time on Face the Nation tonight. When we return, we're going to speak to Tony Leon. This was one of the negotiators for the DA in the GNU. He's going to have a chat with us. We'll make an assessment so far, his assessment on the GNU. And the question that many have been asking is the DA going to walk away if the ANC insists on implementing its existing policy? We'll get his thoughts when we return. Stay with us.
For over 30 years, we've been part of your community. Clientele Funeral Plans pay out cash within 24 hours, tax-free. It includes cover for grocery, transport, and unveiling benefits. You can cover yourself and extended family members on one plan. Get peace of mind with a clientele funeral plan. Sikhona for our communities since 1992. SMS cover to 48524 and we'll call you back. SMS now.
Stories Untold is about individuals who are strong, brave, and resilient. It's about individuals who take responsibility for their lives and believe in second chances.
We amplify the voice of the marginalized. We are a platform of recovery, a platform of hope, a platform of victory.
An absolute pleasure and a privilege to trailblaze content that boasts of inclusion, the type that represents stories of everyday Africans who do extraordinary things.
We all have a purpose on the universe. What's yours?
Catch Stories Untold on the SABC News channel every Sunday at 8:30 p.m.
Welcome back. The question we've been asking you tonight is whether it makes sense to you when politicians change their minds, like what we've seen with Floyd Shivambu, Dalimpofu, Julius Malema, and many others, and they change their minds and they argue that they were misled in the past when they attacked certain politicians that they now revere. Here are some of your responses on Twitter. Patrick says, they are never misled. Politicians do their research on many matters. It's just that you cannot go under a certain leader and then speak ill of them. So yeah, that's a good excuse. Vo Tsatsawani says it's not justified at all. As a high-ranking leader of a party that was deemed the brains of the party, how do you get misled by someone else to criticize another person? It doesn't make any sense. Dennis says they speak the same language and play shift goalposts when relationships grow sour. Trust politicians at your risk. Letsopo says that's the nature of politics. Politicians say something today and say it differently with a straight face tomorrow. Nothing you can do. You just need to know they're decisive. Let's move to this now. The Minister of Communications and Digital Technologies, as you've heard in our previous conversation, that's Solly Malatsi. He decided to withdraw the SABC bill, and that has sparked some mixed reaction. While DA members support the decision, Kusela Sangoni Diko is the chairperson of the Parliamentary Portfolio Committee and with the ANC criticizes it. Malatsi called the bill flawed and raised concerns about its impact on the public broadcaster's independence and sustainability. But his deputy, Mondli Gungubele, has just told us now that that decision is illogical and counterproductive. This is the second time now that DA members in the Government of National Unity have opposed legislation from the previous administration. In fact, we've seen several of these examples. The former DA leader, Tony Leon, joins us tonight to just assess the Government of National Unity and touch on some of these issues so far. Tony, thank you so much for making time for us tonight on Face the Nation. Good morning. Good evening.
Good evening, Clement. Nice to be with you again.
Let me start off with where we just left off now with the Deputy Minister of Communications. He's not seeing eye to eye with the Minister of Communications who comes from the DA on the issue of the SABC bill. And they're both communicating differently on this matter. And it's something we have seen with the Department of Public Works as well, where the minister from the DA will say something and his deputy from the ANC will have a different take on it. Are these signs of an incoherent government messaging because of policy differences, or are these just small waters that it was expected and the GNU ministers will find their tune soon?
Clement, I think it's all of the above, just to quote from the list you've just offered. So on the one hand, I mean, Cyril Ramaphosa, the president, was very keen to emphasize he had the prerogative of power to appoint ministers and deputy ministers. The DA got a share of the ministries and deputy ministries, and that's all they agreed to. It was up to the president to make the disposition on who would be a deputy minister when the DA appoints a minister. And what he decided to do, whether it's for good governance or for internal party purposes, was to make sure wherever there was an DA minister, there'd be an ANC deputy minister.
Yeah.
And the reverse of that. Now, for example, if you go take another ministry, which is arguably much more important, you really, SABC is important to you, the Ministry of Finance, which after all is the absolute engine of government. You've got an ANC minister, you've got a DA deputy minister, you've got a ANC deputy minister, you've got like a triangle there. And that department, that ministry, which is absolutely crucial and foundational to the whole of government, actually seems to be firing on all cylinders and seems to be very joined up and unified in its approach. So that doesn't apply across the whole of government, as you've just illustrated with this SABC Bill dispute. Now, theoretically, and it is a theory until it's put into practice, this was envisaged, and I was somewhat involved in the drawing up of the GNU agreement, the so-called statement of intent, that where there is a dispute, where there's a disagreement between the parties in the government, and the DA is one party and the ANC is another party in this case, it will go to a committee which will resolve those differences according to a formula. So, not that I'm there, I mean, I'm like you, I'm speaking from the outside. I was inside for 6 weeks. I'm very happy to be outside again. If there's a dispute like this where the minister and the deputy minister don't agree and the chairman of the committee doesn't agree with the minister but sides the deputy minister, then that cries out for dispute resolution. And the statement of intent actually deals with that. It envisages that situation. It's created a forum. So I think, yes, it's exactly what happens when one party doesn't have all the seats and all the powers, and that party is the ANC, and there's another party which has some of the power, which is the DA in this case. And, you know, if this thing is going to work going forward, they've got to actually use the mechanisms that have already been created and built in to achieve the kind of unity and purposefulness that any government needs. So that would be my obvious solution to this issue.
Yeah, and there was a dispute resolution mechanism that was set up recently to resolve these policy differences. And I think it was only recently set up, but there was so many public spats and differences, and I don't think it's managed to do what it's intended to do. But here's the problem, Tony. There is a fundamental difference in how the ANC and the DA understand even this issue of sufficient consensus, that as negotiators, you put in the document of intent. The document of intent states that sufficient consensus exists when, among other parties to the GNU representing 60% of seats in the National Assembly agree. But the ANC says, well, that's 60% of parties in the GNU. So already there's a fundamental difference.
Clement, I don't want to interrupt you, but that's not on the agreement. And because I helped write that agreement, it's 60% of the seats in the National Assembly, not 60% of the seats in the cabinet. Because obviously the ANC allocates
that's what I'm
70% of the seats in the cabinet. And we were aware of that when we were drawing that up, that actually we wouldn't know how many positions the ANC would give itself, and we didn't know how many other parties would be, but we absolutely knew on the 30th of May or the 31st of May that what the election result was. And that's why the agreement was written based on the election result, not on how Cyril Ramaphosa would compose or create the cabinet. GNU. So that's very, very clear. And, you know, this is not a dispute of opinion. This is a matter of fact. So, you know, look, if you don't want to be bound by the agreements you signed, if you don't want to be held to the consequences of a solemnly entered undertaking, then obviously this government is not going to work. And there will be serious consequences. I'm not speaking, you know, I've got no skin in the game, Clement. I'm not a minister, deputy minister, or anything else. But I think for this country, if this government fails or does not fulfill its potential, then we're going to have big problems. And I mean, one of the issues you've identified in this program is, you know, there's a new administration in Washington. There is a huge there's a huge change of the political weather among our major trading partners, and you know, we can sit and squabble and disagree and dispute about agreements that we've actually entered into. And that clause, incidentally, that I think is clause 19 of that statement of intent, was argued right down to the wire. And one thing I can tell you is I was in the room when the decision was taken to actually sign up to that and to elect Cyril Ramaphosa as president.
And it is on paper.
We would never have signed the agreement if it didn't have 60% of the seats in the National Assembly as the benchmark. So, I mean, that's a fact. Of that fact, I'm certain. Other facts we can argue about our opinions, but that I happen to know.
And that's precisely the point I was making. That is on paper. I've read it many times, that very specific clause to the ANC's Secretary General. I've read it to Ronald, Lamola and any other senior leaders of the ANC when I have conversations with them about the GNU, but for some reason they still want to read it differently. So the ANC also believes that until an agreed policy agenda developed by the GNU parties is actually agreed upon, all ministers are obliged to implement existing ANC policy in government. And I mean, we have seen a few policy differences. The Bella Bill, the NHI, BEE, the EPWP program may be reviewed soon. The issues around procurement regulations requiring that government contracts that are above 30 million rand have 30% of the value subcontracted to local businesses. I can go on and on. So if the ANC, Tony, insists on pushing through with these policies, what option then is available for the DA?
Well, there's always the nuclear option. You can, press the button and depart, but you can only exercise that once. And I do think and know and hope that the DA leadership is very responsible. So I'm going to do that out of a fit of pique or panic. But I just want to say this, and I'm speaking here not as a former political leader, but as I call myself a detribalized attorney. So I know a bit about law. And there's a very old legal principle that you cannot set up your own default if you actually don't perform your side of the agreement in order to advantage yourself later on. And it was made very clear, it's in that agreement that I mentioned that was signed a long time, well, just not so long ago. It was signed in June, but it was the 14th of June, I think. It was very clear in that agreement that one of the first orders of the new government, once it's been set up, would have been to actually create a mechanism, a forum, in which government policy could be created and agreed upon. Now, it's up to the president and his side of the table to set up that forum and that mechanism. If he and the ANC have not set up that mechanism, then they can't simply say, well, in the absence of an agreed mechanism, you've got to go along with what the ANC dictates. It's a complete contradiction of both the spirit, the principle, the letter, and the understanding, as I understood it. But, it's up to those who are sitting with their feet around the cabinet table to decide on this. But I want to go back to the national and international interest for a minute. We can have all the disputes and arguments and disagreements, but frankly, and it probably looks like from the ANC point of view a very memorable old happy day when the same Ronald Lamola went to Washington and met Anthony Blinken, the outgoing Secretary of State, and he's going to have a much harder time when he meets the incoming Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, but that's another matter. The first thing he did in the public declarations at the bilateral meeting was to say, we're very fortunate, we've got this government of national unity, we're now sharing power with the opposition. You cannot project one face in Washington, D.C., and show a second face when you actually with your same colleagues around the cabinet table, because frankly, Clement, that's called bad faith. Not a good face or a bad face, a bad faith. And I hope, these might be interim squabbles, early, days, that this doesn't become the direction of traffic going forward. Because if it is, then you've got to say, what's this government actually going to achieve, other than having fights and disputes and unresolved issues?
Yeah, and what do you make of how these disputes have also been carried out? Because the ANC has now dared the DA to leave the GNU if it wants, or stop undermining the party, or try weaken it from within. I mean, Helen Zille hasn't really helped, has she, with all the comments she has been making publicly, including that the business community wanted the DA to prop up Cyril Ramaphosa?
Well, look, I'm not going to enter dispute on what she said or the business community said. I had a lot of calls from a lot of people during that very fraught time. I think a lot of South Africans with a lot of skin in the economic game here were very keen that an arrangement be made, and an arrangement was made on, frankly, from the DA's point of view, I would say fairly mediocre terms for it. It could have got more, maybe could have demanded more, because they needed to put aside the party interest and focus on the national interest. And one of the national interests was, can we actually, prevent our economy being driven completely into a ditch? And, there's always the other alternative. The ANC, at the end of the day, can govern as a minority government with 40%, but good luck with that. Or they could eject or constructively dismiss the DA from the government. The old Labour law thing, constructive dismissal. The other party leaves, but actually you force them to leave. That's called constructive dismissal. And then they can bring in the MK and the EFF, and good luck. That's another option. But, you look at the Rand, the South African Rand, on which, of course, we depend in terms of paying our way on the bond market, which we depend, as someone said, on the kindness of strangers to keep our government debts serviced. It's doing very badly in the last week, not because of anything internally, because of what's called the Trump trade coming out of the extraordinary results in the US last Tuesday. I promise you this, and not because I'm a gloomster or a doomsday scenarist. If the DA is forced out or chooses to leave, this government of national unity, you'll look at an 18 rand to the dollar rand or 19 rand to the dollar rand as a very, very happy old time. You'll be looking at something north of 22, 23 to the dollar. And all that means is that the debt, which is consuming, the second highest item of our budget, will just go through the ceiling and our rand will go down through the floor. And we'll be left in the most terrible financial, economic, and then political position. But these are consequences, not choices. You can make good choices and avoid bad consequences, or the reverse of that. That's just my view.
Speaking of consequences, what would be the consequences for the DA? I had Rolf Meyer on the show a week or so ago as the former Minister of Constitutional Affairs in the first GNU, and he was sharing with us some lessons that this new GNU can learn from the old one on how to manage their differences. And one of the things he said was that the National Party left the GNU in 1996 during then President Nelson Mandela's presidency, which he argued led to the party's collapse and disappearance from the political scene. So if the DA decides to leave the GNU, they could face the same fate, is what he was arguing. Do you agree?
Well, Clement, I've got a huge amount of respect for Rolf, and he's a great guy. But, I was in the party, the DP, which I led time, which benefited from the National Party's demise because we scooped up a lot of their votes. The National Party's decision to leave the GNU in 1996 was not the cause of the National Party's demise. There were a lot of other, in my view, and I was, an eyewitness to that time, but I mean, Rolf and I might have a slightly different take on that. But I think Rolf was there, and I've often referenced, I'll tell you something else. The late F.W. de Klerk made a speech in Parliament after his party left the GNU in May 1996. And F.W. de Klerk said it was the equivalent of being on a form of political death row because the National Party was trapped in a government and they had no say how the government would function. And I was very conscious of that. And I was one of the negotiators who'd actually been in those 1990 constitutional negotiations of the failure of the first government of national unity. So I said to my team on my side, you've got to write an agreement where you don't land up with a situation where there are no ground rules for this new government of national unity, because there weren't in the previous one, just an allocation of cabinet seats based on election results, but there was no agreement. And one of de Klerk, and I might say Rolf Meyer's as well, complaints between 94 and 96 was that they kept asking the ANC for an agreement about how the cabinet would work. And they couldn't get it from the ANC.
All right.
So this time, we actually got an agreement in writing from the ANC about how it would work. So I think, that's a big difference between GNU this time around and the GNU of 1994. But once again, I just go back, the law of I don't want to sound like a lawyer, well, I suppose I am an ex-lawyer. The law of partnership And this is a partnership. When two parties agree to cooperate in any entity, they form a partnership. The law of partnership depends on the utmost good faith between the parties. So it's one thing to complain. It's quite appropriate. You have legitimate differences. But if there is bad faith at the top and across the cabinet table, this thing can't work.
Okay.
If there's good faith and honest dealing, it can. And, you know, we've got to hope that there's good faith, not bad faith in this. Because if it's just about jockeying for a position or winning a point, then, yeah, it's not going to happen.
Tony Leon, thank you so much for speaking to us.
Thank you.
On Face the
Thank you,
Nation
Clement.
tonight. After the break, we're going to talk about SA and US relations. South Africa has a new ambassador to the United States, Ebrahim Rasool. He'll speak to us after this. Welcome back. International Relations and Cooperation Minister Ronald Lamola has announced that President Cyril Ramaphosa has appointed Ebrahim Rasool as the ambassador to the United States. Rasool previously held this position. His appointment comes as the U.S. prepares for a new Republican administration following Donald Trump's election victory. Rasool joins us now via Teams. Ambassador, thank you so much for making time for us. You are returning to Washington for a second stint as the country's ambassador, and you are coming at quite a critical time as the U.S. prepares to usher in a new Republican government in January with Donald Trump as president. I guess the question is, have you buckled up?
Hey, my brother, I think that it's expected to be a rough ride. I think there's been a little bit of history recently, but I do think that I need to reward the confidence of the president and the confidence of the minister by giving this my absolute best shot. What I do take with me is some experience of the United States, so I hit the ground running. I don't find my feet. And I also take with me the confidence with which both our government and the U.S. government has acted to expedite my return to Washington. So maybe there are things that people see in me that I can do that I would have to live up to.
Yeah. The relations between South Africa and the U.S. have been tricky for some time now, more so over the last 2 years, with differences on foreign policy issues like the war in Ukraine, the war on Gaza. And yes, a lot of work has been done over the last year to mend the relations, but a lot more work still needs to be done. So where do you even begin as ambassador coming in with this new administration?
Look, I think the point of the matter is to understand that South Africa has very strong values on which we stand, but at the same time, the needs of our country also mean that we have very strong interests. And so it will be absolutely critical in order to secure our interests that we shift onto an economic diplomacy conversation with the United States of America. I think we do want to retain AGOA because the livelihoods of millions of people depend on it. I think we do want to increase investments, keep American companies in South Africa, maintain an export direction to the USA. And I think a lot of that means overcoming misunderstandings in the way our foreign policy has been presented, in the way that we have been misunderstood on the other side. And I think we need to navigate the new terrain that has been opened up by the president-elect Donald Trump's victory in the United States. So those are things that we can navigate and work our way around.
Yeah, I was listening to the Minister of International Relations, Ronald, earlier today, saying that the relationship between the new government, with us would be tricky on a number of issues. And there's almost this expectation, Ambassador, that this administration in the U.S. won't be kind to us, partly because there are some Republican congressmen who called for a full review of the U.S.'s bilateral relations with South Africa following the International Court of Justice ruling that found it plausible that Israel committed acts of genocide against Gaza. And the biggest concern now is AGOA, which is up for consideration next year, and whether or not that's now at risk.
Look, I think that AGOA is up for review. I think that my own history is one of working in a bipartisan way. I had to contend with both Republicans and Democrats to extend AGOA by 2014. I think we did so successfully. Many of those people are there. But I think that what is different, without minimizing the impact of the geopolitical positions that we may diverge on, but I think that we must understand that we have a transactional language that could be entering the White House. We need, as South Africa, to understand what are our leverages in the United States economy. What do we need from them? What do they need from us? I think, for example, of critical minerals, our need for beneficiating that, and the ability to say to the United States that we have what you can be using, and you have what we may require for ourselves as a country and for Africa as a continent. And I think that that's the kind of language that we must open up, that I think it may largely have to be pragmatic and transactional, but I don't think that it means sacrificing core values, because at the end of the day, I think what we share with President-elect Trump is that we want to end conflicts in the world that can be ended.
Will the South African government continue to stand its ground on positions and approaches that it takes on global issues without being bullied? Because I imagine our geopolitical positioning is going to come under quite severe pressure now, more than what we saw with the last administration.
I think that South Africa is recognized as a moral superpower. This comes from the way in which we have conducted our anti-apartheid struggle and the way in which Americans have rallied to it in their numbers. It's the way in which we managed a transition that could have gone horribly violent. It's the way in which our first generations of governance were based on absolute democracy and moving towards eradicating backlogs. And so we have that. And so it's difficult to back down on issues where human rights are at stake, whether in Gaza or anywhere else. But I do believe that South Africa must have a balance of values, those that involve the genocide, as well as those that involve the needs of our people, particularly the 31% that are unemployed, because there are values related to their poverty. And so I think it is about calibrating a path that isn't a zero-sum game, but that is nuanced enough, that speaks to the complexity of these relationships, and that says we can engage. We don't always have to use the megaphone to conduct our discussions.
Yes, and what meetings then do you have? So what are your first priorities? I know over the last year or two, we've had many of our ministers traveling to the US, even before the elections, traveling to the US to try and explain our positions on Ukraine, our positions on the Middle East, because there were tensions there. And our trade and industry minister has made constant trips to the US to try and make sure that AGOA is not at risk here and caught in the crossfire. How are you hoping to reassure America that we are still committed as South Africa to these bilateral trade relations that benefit both of us? Will you be bringing with you ministers from South Africa? Will you be holding meetings first by yourself? What approach are you considering taking?
I think that there are a number of important precursor steps that would need to be taken. Firstly, I think we must acknowledge the impact and the success of the visits by Ministers Park Stow and Ronald Lamola. They have won back some ground from which to work. I want to acknowledge the discussion that our president had with President-elect Trump over the weekend, and I think the invitation to President Trump to attend and to have a state visit around the G20, I think that's absolutely critical. And then I think we also need, and one of my important tasks is not to be man alleen. I think we need to be able to understand what is the state of the embassy in Washington, the missions in the USA, because we need to strengthen that, rejuvenate it, give it a sense of purpose again, and that's going to be priority number one. And then I think we need to look at who are the new entrants into the administration, where are they from, how do we work with them, and how do we get into Congress on both sides of the aisle, the Senate on both sides of the aisle. So I think it would be foolish we must hit the ground running, but we mustn't jump in boots and all without first understanding the new situation, because we also come with a new situation. We come as representatives of a government of national unity, and we go into a new situation with an administration led by President-elect Trump. And I think that we must give each other sufficient benefit of the doubt in order to achieve what I believe are mutually reinforcing values and certainly mutually beneficial interests that we have between us.
Yeah, Ambassador Ebrahim Rasool, looks like it's going to be a bumpy ride, but you've got the experience to handle it. All the best.
Thank you very much, Clement.
Thank you. That's Ambassador Ebrahim Rasool, someone who will have that task of ensuring that South African and US relations stay intact. All right, here's that question we've been asking you tonight about politicians who say terrible things about people, and then much later they change their minds and they say wonderful things about those people, and they want to argue, oh no, sorry, we were misled. Like they were young children whom these positions were forced on them. Is that justified? Let's start with your tweets. Vic says it is justified. Remember, in politics, when you are led, you listen to your commander and you can't start questioning the decision, or you will be seen as factional and you'll be sidelined. Tumi says, no, it's not justified. Politicians who have charismatic personal agendas will always have an open mind to duly benefit opportunities presented before them, gunning higher ranks to influence and more popularity. Therefore, they will criticize where they don't benefit. I thank you so much for all the tweets that you have sent us responding to this question we're asking tonight. Some of you have also been sending us some WhatsApp voice notes, so let's take a listen to some of those that have come through so far.
Clement, I don't think it is a good idea for politicians to change from their stance. It seems as if they are looking for greener pastures to enrich themselves instead of saving the community at large. That is why it is easy for them to forgive and to forget. It's Bonisile Ndabambi in Mthatha.
How are you doing, Clems? It's SK Zondi from Pietermaritzburg. On the issue of politicians changing their opinions whenever it suits them, it's just proof that as the people, we can't take them seriously, because it's just adamant proof that these people are just doing politics for their stomachs, not for the interest of the country or the future of the country or the people. Thank you.
Hi there. What is surprising about the politicians is that they always say, it looks like they are using the stencil of saying, we have been misled, we have been misled. I don't get the clear message of as for who misled them and why did they allow themselves to be misled, and yet they've got the brains. Because obviously God cannot give us brains and make us fail to use our own brains. Where were their senses, where they were being misled?
All right. Thank you so much for all your tweets. Thank you for your voice notes as well. And thank you for watching the Tuesday edition of Face the Nation. We'll be back with you on Thursday at 8 p.m. Thanks for watching. Cheers.